My background's quite different to David's. I am a PK. Does anybody know what a PK is?
Chewing gum?
Well, like that, yeah. PK, preacher's kid. My father was an Anglican minister, so I essentially grew up in a Christian home. And I'm a West Coaster by birth, so I originated in Reefton, was my birthplace. I don't know many people in Reefton. In all my years down in Southland, I've met one person who's originated in Reefton, and they actually knew my father, which was interesting. He was, it was his first parish as an Anglican minister. He run the youth group, I guess you'd call it, and she was a member of Dad's youth group, so she remembered Dad from those days. Anyway, that aside, so that's my background. I grew up as a son of an Anglican minister, and he had a brief soiree away from that, where he was a counsellor for National Society of Alcoholism and Drug Dependence when we lived in Auckland, and then he was invited to take up a chaplaincy position with the New Zealand Army. So I was an Army brat for about 6 years of my teenage life, and we lived at Burnham military camp for the duration that I was there until I left home. And I went to university. I studied, I did a forestry degree, so my career has largely been in forestry. I'm married to my wife, Michelle. We've been married 34 years now. We have 6 children, and just as of Friday afternoon, 4 grandchildren. So my eldest daughter has 4 children. My youngest son gets married at the end of this year. So we've got the oldest married and the youngest about to be married, and somewhere in between we've got to fill in the chapters. So, now I have 3 daughters and 3 sons, and they've all abandoned us. We're the only Southlanders left. My family is, most of them are in Christchurch, and I have my second eldest son is finishing a Bachelor of Surveying at Otago University, so he lives in Dunedin. Anyway, I met David as a Boys Brigade leader about 26 years ago, I think. And so I've known David and Heather and their family. Our family's mixed a little bit as the kids were growing up when they were out on the farm at Dacre there. And then David sold the farm, and he went to Lifeway, and we carried on in forestry, and our paths crossed again when he returned to Kennington, and we've maintained our friendship since then. But I guess my Christian background, I moved away from the Anglican Church when we got married. Became a part of the Baptist Church when we lived in Invercargill here. We moved to Invercargill here just over 30 years ago now, with the Forest Service winding up. And so I was part of what was known as Glengarry Baptist. It's now Eastside Baptist. Then I was part of, briefly, Invercargill Christian Centre, I think it's known now. It was Invercargill Apostolic Church there in the old Wool Exchange on Leet Street. And then we moved to Mataura, and we continued in the Apostolic Church there in Gore, and then shifted to where we are now for the last 20 years. We're part of Gore Baptist Church. But I guess like David, my frustration as a Christian has been, you know, we read the Bible, we see all the wonderful things that Jesus has done, and we see that he not only died for us, but he came to set us free from sickness and demonic activity that is part of what we face in this world. And And my frustration, I guess, over many years has been, well, where is the power in all this? Where is, what's happening in our churches when all we see is we go to church, we enjoy meeting with each other, we love being in the presence of God, but where is the power of God in our churches? Where is the power of God in our churches? And sadly myself, I've not experienced that. For myself, it wasn't really until, of more recent times, as David shared, his frustration led him to really seek others who are operating in the power of God and expecting to move in faith and see people healed and delivered and set free. And David prayed with me for about 5 years ago, and I experienced as a Christian what it meant to be delivered. And that was a really freeing time for me. But you get sucked back into the whole church thing. It's like people want to put you down. You experience the power of Christ in your life. You experience the reality of something changing for you personally, and yet people kind of don't want to really accept that that's happened. They kind of don't embrace that thing, that experience that's been very real for you. And so I fell flat on my face again after that, and probably over the last 5 years I've struggled with depression, and it's been a bit of a torrid time. But anyway, last year David challenged me. He says, Paul, I'd really like you to come to Zambia, because I knew when David and Ricky went in 2015, I was really excited for them, and when David came back, he obviously shared some of what was happening, and that was great. Wow, God really is, happening, through, ministering, the ministry experience that I had in Zambia. And anyway, David challenged me last year, and he says, I really would like you to come and join us this year. And I thought, oh gosh, how the heck's this going to be happening? There's a whole financial thing. All those things start to flood in around you, and you think, oh, what is this? Where's this going to lead? And so I said, yeah, I was open to it, and then I kind of just put it on the back burner. And about January of this year, David said, you're coming to Zambia with us, aren't you, Paul? I said, well, I'd really love to. I just don't know how this is going to happen. Like the big financial dollars and cents, sign sort of was glaring there at me, and I thought, well, God, this is going to have to be you. And the other thing, I didn't want it to be a burden on Michelle and I. I wanted my wife to know that this is what God wanted for us. And anyway, come March of this year, I don't know how many of you have heard of Mark and Miriam Holloway, the Freedom Diaries. Anyway, I've known of Mark and Miriam for a couple of years now, but we went to their Gore meeting back in March, and as Mark does, he challenges you during the meeting to journal and just take 5 minutes and just journal and have a conversation with God. And so I thought, well, Zambia's a fairly big question in my mind at this stage. We're facing 2 months away, and so I said, well, I just simply wrote, God, do you want me to go to Zambia? And he said yes. And I sort of, obviously the question about money and stuff came up, and he says not to worry about it. And I parked it up that note, and I was away at the farm. I work at a dairy farm now. I've gone to the dark side, as I say. forestry's the light side, and the dairy's the dark side, but so I've gone to the dark side. And so I didn't get to Mark and Miriam's evening on the Saturday night. Michelle went by herself, and she happened to have, she just took the diary that I had, the notebook I had, and she, during the 5 minutes that Mark gave opportunity to talk to God and journal in, she asked the same question. Guess what God said to her? Yes. Yes. So I was kind of, I get a bit emotional about it because it was quite a big deal for us. It was a key for me that, hey, God, if you really want us to be a part of this mission trip, I wanted to know that Michelle had the same thought. And so that started, I was kind of committed in more than one way. And so David and I were believing for the money. Ricky and Rena had already, clipped the ticket, and they were good to go. And Steve Wilson, we were communicating with Steve and Jai up in Nelson, and they were believing God for the money. And so we were saying, well, God, you've got to come through on this. And Michelle had been encouraged. God had said to her, well, I will provide the way to go forward. And the weeks went by, and it was getting closer. We were flying out on Saturday the 27th, I think it was whatever date, the last weekend of May, and we'd sort of booked in the Jetstar flight to Auckland, and we were getting as far as Auckland. But Zambia was sort of looming as a long swim if the flight money didn't come through, because I said, I'm going to get there if I have to swim there. And anyway, Sunday, the weekend prior to us going, I wasn't going to share. I was just floating under the radar, so to speak, with church. I was really quite unsure, how am I going to sort of bridge this with my my brothers and sisters at Gore Baptist Church. And I didn't want to create a big scene, because I was kind of fearful, I guess. I have to be honest. I was kind of fearful. Is God going to really come through on this? Is God really going to provide for me to get to Zambia? And or am I just dreaming all this? Is this just something that is a desire of my own? And I was talking about it with Michelle. Well, no, actually, Michelle said on the Saturday, she says, now, are you going to say anything at church, Paul? And kind of this went in my spirit. And I felt very convicted. And I said, well, I guess, and she says, you've got to say something to them. You've got to tell, these are your, brothers and sisters, sort of thing. And so anyway, that was the beginning of God's provision for us to go. I stepped up in front of the church, and for the first time I said, I'm going to Zambia, and we go next weekend, and kind of like, wow. And there was a mixed response. Some people were really glad, and others were, kind of like, oh yeah. Obviously, to backpedal a little bit, obviously I told the guys at work. I had to let my boss know that, hey, I wanted to take 5 or 6 weeks off overseas, and they were amazingly supportive. I worked for Nifdale Station and Andrew Tripp. I don't know if any of you know the Tripps at Nifdale. Andrew's Christian, fine Christian man, and runs a very good ship out there, big station. And Jan de Klerk is his dairy manager, and I work for Jan. And Jan was exceedingly supportive and really wanted me to go. So gave us the time off. Anyway, to come back to the Sunday, I shared, and a couple of people come up and they said, look, this is really exciting. I'm really pleased for you. This is wonderful. And Jan came up to me at the service, after the service. He says, now, Paul, how much do you need to go to Zambia? And I sort of gave him a figure, roughly, just to cover costs, etc. I gave him a figure, and he says, well, you let me think about this. So he just left it there, left it hanging. Anyway, we went home. We come up to Gore to see some friends later that afternoon. I was sitting in New World at car park. Michelle had gone in there, and this text arrives on my phone, and it's Jan, and he says, been talking to the financial manager, obviously his wife, and we think we can help you out here. We'd like to roll forward your leave and pay you in advance, and we'd love to financially support you by giving you a gift of $500. And I kind of far out, this is suddenly, you've gone from, all you've got is a Jetstar ticket to Auckland, to suddenly having the ability to go to Zambia, pay for the ticket, and actually have money to support you during the time you're going to be away. And it was quite different. To be honest, David and I had really been believing God for a miraculous sum of money, in your face, here we are, here's a gift. Even to the point of actually walking up in the airport and expecting someone to pass us some tickets to go to Zambia. It was kind of that's where we were. We could get ourselves to Auckland. God, you've got to provide the rest of the way. But God had his own ways of doing it, and we we got there and we were provided for. So that was just a wonderful testimony of God's goodness, and being able to meet a big question mark that I had about going to Zambia. That kind of put the stamp on it for me.
Amen.
Here we are, I'm on the way. And then the next big thing for me, really, was wearing this shirt here. He's my model. He can stand up and wear this shirt. Okay? I might sound a bubbly sort of guy in one sense here and be able to put on a brave face, but honestly, to wear a shirt like that in public in New Zealand, I don't know what you guys would think about wearing a shirt like that around through the airports and travelling all over the world with it, but it kind of was a big deal for me. I don't wear shirts like that sort of have in-your-face kind of statements on them. It just isn't my nature. I kind of like to hide in the background. But here we... This guy goes and prints a heap of T-shirts, and I got to wear one. And this is the uniform, and we're wearing it from go to woe. So here's me on the Saturday morning of the 27th of May, putting on a Doing What T-shirt and rocking up to the Dunedin airport and walking onto the plane with, I'm a Christian, look at me, I do what Jesus did, sort of thing, holy smokes, and this is just not me. But, I really believe God gave us an amazing peace. This was about just trusting Him. And this is the biggest thing I think one of the big things that I've had to learn is to really step out and trust. And as David shared earlier, you show me your faith and I'll show you my faith by works. However it goes. and it's that stepping out and actually doing something. And what's more, actually believing that what you're doing is because Jesus has given you his authority to do it. We're his representative. We're his flesh and blood. We're his hands and feet here now. So we sat next to an interesting guy on the plane. He was a guy probably about our own age, I guess. He had just visited his daughter in Dunedin and been staying there. Was heading back to Auckland, so he was a good Jaffa. And I was pegged between David here, me in the middle, and this guy on the aisle seat in the plane. So I got chatting with him briefly and see what we were doing. And he says, "Oh, I read this funny story recently. There was an African pastor. He took his congregation down to the river there, and he was going to walk on water for his congregation. And he steps out into the water, and a crocodile eats him up. He had a great laugh about this, and on the face of it, it's really quite here's me sitting here with doing what Jesus did. It was very amusing. Anyway, David leans over and he starts, and straight away the guy changed, didn't he? He just went from this guy that he just said, "I know what you're on about. I won't have you speak to me any more about this." You know, and boom, just like that, he just closed David down. Man, talk about a manifestation straight away. This guy. And okay, of course, I was sitting in the middle going, awkward. What am I going to do for the rest of this fight? So that's the sort of in-your-face sort of thing you get when you wear a T-shirt like that. People see it, they do. They you get different in New Zealand. That's the response you get. People don't say anything to us, did we? We had not a single person in New Zealand approach us on the basis of what we were wearing on our T-shirts. Zambia, as David said, totally different. Anyway, we had a wonderful journey going over, and people come up to you. We had a beautiful young lady, Becky was her name, she was just a beautiful girl. Similar in age to my youngest boy, and she was heading off to Mozambique to join with Heidi Baker Ministries, and I had a lovely talk to her for about an hour odd at Addis Ababa airport. We just talked, and she opened herself up about her journey in coming to know God and her past experience and how God touched her, and she felt a real calling to go to Heidi Baker and join with her ministry for about 3 months, and her fiance was going to meet her over there at some point. But anyway, I mean, she was just one person. She saw our T-shirts when we were at Bangkok, and instantly came up to us. And she spoke with David. I don't know whether Becky spoke with you. No, she didn't. No, she wouldn't have, because she went travelling with us. That's right. She spoke with Steve and Jai. Anyway, that was just one. We had an Indian pastor while we were at Addis Ababa. Amazing guy. He's from northern India. Has an incredible ministry up in northern India. He's got orphanages. He has an international ministry, and he's actually specifically invited. He said, "Look, he'd love us to come over to northern India." So I think you've got his contact, haven't you? Yeah, David's got his contact. But that was, and other experiences like that we had as we were travelling through the airports. But when we got to Zambia, wow, what a different story. When you Zambia, for those who don't know the population there, I believe it's about 95%. They say about 95% Christian will call themselves Christians in Zambia. Yeah. I mean, like, it's the total flip reverse of New Zealand. Mm-hmm. So you've got, in theory, a country that's really open to Christianity. And so when we were walking in Lusaka, for example, and yes, my jaw was dropping, I work out as on I'm not, what's it, agoraphobic, which I think that's the fear of wide open spaces. I definitely don't have a fear of wide open spaces. I work where there are no people. All my life I've worked out in the bush and the land. For me, coming into a place like Lusaka, yeah, people in your face. It's just organised chaos. Honestly, it's just amazing. There's just people everywhere. But you wear a T-shirt like that, and people want to know you. They do. They come up to you and they go, "Doing what Jesus did." You know, "Hey, you're doing what Jesus did." You know, they really do come up to you and embrace you. And we had some amazing conversations, didn't we? We had some amazing conversations with people, opportunities to pray for people, and this is on the street, like this is out on the street. People are not embarrassed to receive prayer and ministry right there on the roadside, in the bus, anywhere. They're open to receive that ministry, and for me, that was just an amazing experience to see how different our cultures are in terms of how we embrace Christ in our culture. Here in New Zealand, Jesus is a curse word. He's a non-event basically, and there's so many people that just don't want to have anything to do with a church, with a Christian. And they're just totally blinded. In Zambia, people know that they have a need for Christ, much more so. Look, I'm not saying that everybody's like that. There are people who, don't want to know you, but that's very few and far between. That people are way more open and very much more understanding of what it means to be spiritually, they're spiritually aware, I guess is the best way of saying it. They're very much more spiritually aware. And so that for me, that was a big deal. Like, wow, people really do embrace Christ in a different way to what we do. But the interesting thing for me, I found, and I come back to what I started with, the whole presence of God, power of God thing. Actually, I think in the churches, when we went to the churches, it was interesting to note that in not in many regards, but in a number of ways, they're quite similar to us in New Zealand in terms of, 3 songs, prayers, loud music, like stupidly loud. It's just the last church I preached, and all 3 of us preached at different churches on our last Sunday in Lusaka. And if you can imagine, I was the little congregation I went to met in a school, which was essentially it must have been a private school, I think, or something along those lines anyway. And there were 5 different churches, would you believe, in this one little school area, and each had their own classroom. and I reckon there was a competition for who was making the loudest noise, seriously. If you can imagine being in a brick room, just a solid concrete walls from here to about here to the back end of the third table there. That was about the size of the room that the church that I was in, this church met. They had a keyboard and a loudspeaker here with an amplifier, and it was just... I was just sitting there and I was going... I was just about to walk out. I just couldn't believe it. It's just so insanely... 10 minutes later, do you know what happened? 2 boys walked in with another speaker, connected it up, and put it on the other side. Oh my goodness! Oh, the noise, and it's just, look, honestly, it's insane. I think, Ricky, you challenged Godfrey about it, didn't you?
Yeah.
I think at the end, yeah. And it's not it was just all through the churches that we went to. So loud. So they have a church culture that is, has its own foibles, just like us. And that's what struck me. That's what struck me. That they have needs too, to know a freedom in Christ that we don't. We all need to embrace, whether we're in Zambia, whether we're in New Zealand, whether we're anywhere else in the world. We have a church culture that is who we are. But, and look, they, as David said, they're passionate, play ball, prayer. Man, there's one young fella there, oh my goodness. I think it was a church when we were in Kasama, and he was jumping around the room, going like this, having the prayer. He was going for it. And, that they are really passionate. But they too need to understand what it means to do what Jesus did. They are struggling too with embracing the reality of who Christ is as a representative of Christ. And that, I think, was so refreshing, wasn't it? That David and Ricky, their motivation was to train, to encourage, to engage them in a manner that said that for them was, hey, yeah, Christ lives in me. I can do what Jesus did too. And that was my experience as well. I honestly, I was the green boy on the block going, and by the end of my time there, and I thank you, Ricky, for the encouragement. I preached at 2 or 3 different churches while I was there. On my last church service, where we were getting rocked out of this building, I actually got to preach, and I refused to preach with a microphone because a teacher in that room wouldn't have had a microphone, and it was a room, as I say, about that size, and it was a classroom, so why would you need a microphone? So I just preached, and I was really well received, which was just wonderful, and I asked them to come up for ministry, and there's the interesting thing about is a few things get lost in translation. I don't speak Bemba or any other local language, and yes, their main language is English, isn't it? Yep. Their national language is English. And so most of them who have had some education can speak rudimentary English, and probably, I'd say, better than 50% of them would speak fluent English, wouldn't they? Yeah. As they speak fluent English. But you still have a lot of local dialect, and then of course you get accents and what have you, which complicate matters as well. So things do get lost in translation. But anyway, I asked them if there were any who wanted prayer, ministry for prayer in this little church on the Sunday morning, and nobody came up. So I thought, oh well, okay. So I wasn't quite sure what was happening. Anyway, the loud music started again, and someone who spoke the language, who was the pastor, he must have put the same message out, and suddenly I had 4 or 5 people come up, and so that was great. So we prayed for 3 of them, and the 3 women came up. They went back. They seemed to be happy. I wasn't quite sure exactly what was going on because the music's going like rocking. Mm-hmm. And anyway, this other lady, she was an older lady. I just started praying for her. Again, I couldn't hear what was going on. I just, but like David said, he, just lay hands on her. So here's me. I just put my hand on this woman, just on her head, and I just started praying for her, and she just spun around like that. She was sort of, I don't know if I can imagine, you can imagine Hayley here. I was just like this, praying for this one. She spun on my hand, literally spun on my hand, and just started lashing out at us. And whatever it was a demonic manifestation. And I stood my ground in the authority that I know I have in Christ, and she was delivered. I don't know what. Again, rocking music. It's you don't know what's going on, but God knew what was going on. Amen. And she was set free. She went back to her seat, happy as anything. Those are wonderful experiences. There's so many other amazing experiences I could share. I don't know how much more time I've got. It's cool. What time do you normally rock up to?
Well, this place shuts at 10, Max.
It shuts at 10, okay.
We've got to be out of here by 10.
Yeah.
I don't know what time it is now.
I think that the experience for me was being somebody who was just an ordinary guy, okay? I've never done anything like this before. I've just been a pew warmer, basically. I love going to church because I get to hang out with some great people. Christianity is a great safe club to belong to because people are, by and large, accepting. But sometimes I think, sadly, that's what we are. We just become a club. We meet. The big difference is we meet to worship God, who we believe in, and we love being in His presence. But we, for whatever reason, in our New Zealand culture anyway, for many of us, the power of God manifesting through us, as we step out in faith and say, well, hey, Jesus did this. Jesus healed the sick. Jesus set the people free. He preached. He engaged people in amazing ways, and they were free. Why aren't we seeing that in our churches? Why aren't we seeing that? That we engage in that relationship with God that embraces all the authority we have in Him, and we go out in faith and minister and see the miraculous happen out in our workplace, in our streets. Why isn't that happening? And it's the same in Zambia. I mean, you don't see people genuinely going out and ministering. We didn't see the Zambian people do that. And the same, any different to New Zealand. But the big difference that is they're open to it. They are so much more open to it. And the wonderful things that, like what Ricky shared. Here were people willing to experience God in refreshing new ways, and to step out in faith and say, well, hey, I want to meet with God in a way that impacts my life, and so I'm prepared to walk that walk that that Ricky described, and people were genuinely set free. At Kasama Gilgal Church, it was interesting because we ran into some hiccups. We were hoping to have a crusade, an outdoor crusade at was it President's Park, wasn't it? Yeah, President's Park, which is a kind of the area we were going to use was kind of like a natural arena with a outdoor, it's sort of like almost a brick gazebo, wasn't it? Really, kind of thing. It was just a large open pavilion building, and that was going to be our venue for the week. But in long story short, the paperwork, there had been issues, hadn't there? Been previous issues with, I guess, unsettled behaviour at some other rallies within Zambia in recent months, and it had meant that authorities had put a moratorium on public gatherings, and you needed to go through a permit process to be able to hold legitimately a public gathering outside of a building. And we got entangled in that, which simply meant we couldn't have the outdoor crusade that we were going to have. So we just held the meetings at the Kasama Gilgal Church. And I think that was quite significant, really, wasn't it? Because it worked out really well, because we engaged a core group of people that God really wanted to touch. And I know that we left that church with people who were encouraged to do what Jesus did through our ministry there. That was a really fulfilling time, and there were some wonderful people there. There was one lady, Bwalia was her name, and it turned out that Bwalia was actually the mother of a lovely young pastor who we met at, David and Ricky met at Kasama 2 years ago, but I met Joffrey at Ndola at the church that we ministered to there that Sunday, And Joffrey is an amazing young pastor. And that was his mum that we ministered to right at the start of the I'll call it crusade, at the ministry at Kasama Gilgal Church. And she was set free. She had her background story was that sadly her marriage had broken up. She was Joffrey's mum, Bwalia, and his dad was an elder at another church, and their relationship had for whatever reason broken up, and Bwalia held a lot of bitterness, and she came forward. I think from memory, I'm just a little vague. I think you connected with her initially, didn't you, David? And she came forward for deliverance. And long story short, she forgave, didn't she? She repented and forgave, her husband and all the hurt and everything, and she was set free miraculously. Wow, what a awesome transformation that was, wasn't it? She just went from this woman who sat initially in the church and wouldn't do anything. By the end of that week, she was praying for people. She was seeing her own personal deliverances and healings through her ministry, and just a totally different person. We got a Facebook notice from Joffrey, didn't we? That his mum is just going in leaps and bounds. What a wonderful testimony. That was some of the fruit of that week at Kasama Gilgal Church, and I believe God knew that we needed to minister to a core group of people there that week. And so what we thought was kind of a bit of a letdown and a disappointment actually was a real fruitful time for core members of that church. There was another young deacon, was it Stephen? Was his name? Yeah, Stephen. And we met him a couple of times down the street when we were in the central part of central business area of Kasama, and we were able to connect him with another man whose situation was fairly desperate. He came up to David and said, "Hey, look, would you come and pray for my parents?" And this couple, it turned out, had been involved in witchcraft and other bits and pieces. Correct me if I'm wrong. And Satanism, basically. And Peter was the man who had engaged David on the street. And it turned out that Peter was a good friend of Stephen. So we knew that, again, another core member of Kasama Gilgal Church was able to follow up and continue on with the ministry that we'd started, because we went and prayed for this couple. She was suffering from a stroke or something, wasn't she? She was having a stroke, and Ricky ended up preaching to a group of kids and seeing some amazing things happen with that group of kids, didn't you? Yeah. And it was just amazing. You know, we went to their home but we know that here's another person that can follow up on what we've left behind. We haven't just left a vacuum. We've left people who are able to minister and continue on doing what Jesus did. And I think for me personally, having never been actually involved in anything like this before, I think seeing the reality of engaging the demonic influence that was in and over lives of people there, it's amazing. I just felt this. When you're confronted with the demonic, it's like this righteous anger rises up in you. Man alive, nothing stirs you up more than seeing a demon suddenly rearing their ugly head and literally throwing people around on the floor. I mean, case in point was Shadrach. David alluded to Shadrach earlier, and if you can imagine 4 men holding a young man down on the ground, and he literally lifts himself up off the ground, and the only reason you're trying to control him is because you're in a closed environment, and things could get rather messy if things got out of hand. The power of the physical power that young man had was superhuman, and there's only one. The only reason he could do that was because of the demonic influence over him. But I mean, he was set free. He just, the change in him was absolutely dramatic. He went from a young man who was sitting there and doing all this sort of finger thing, wasn't he? He was Bruce Lee or something, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And other things, and then suddenly, you deal with that spirit, and it's cast out, and suddenly you got this guy, he just sitting there. He's like a pussycat, like it's just, the transformations were just so dramatic. There was Brenda, and these guys can tell you a lot more, but I'll just share my observations, because I really wasn't involved too much in Brenda's situation. I'd gone out for a walk, and Brenda had come to the house and seeking help, and I knew things were happening because I was 100 metres away from the house. and I could hear a storm. I could hear.
Wow.
I could hear Brenda and the activity coming from the house. I mean, goodness only knows what the neighbours thought sometimes. we had some wonderful experiences. But, you know, Brenda, some sort of, wasn't a snake spirit or something. It was doing a lot of damage to her life. She was a mum, married, 2 children. She had a business that had failed. You know, she had had no sales in her business for about 6 months. She was being hassled by a leader in the community. Things were difficult in their relationship between her and her husband, so things weren't good. And she was desperate for help, and Ricky ministered to her, and basically commanded the demon to come out. It took a while to come out. There was it wasn't going to leave in a hurry. But boy, when it was gone, the difference between that woman, between her afflicted demonically and her set free, was just like chalk and cheese, wasn't it? It was just, she just took her whole appearance changed, didn't it? I mean, you could see it in her face. She was just set free. And that was just the amazing thing, and so many of the deliverance situations that we encounter, or that I was privy to when with these guys, the difference between the person who came and the person who left was dramatic. And I think if nobody can tell me now that demonic activity is a load of hogwash. It's not. It's very, very real. It's extremely real. And I think, again, that's something that we don't embrace easily in New Zealand. We, as David said, we intellectualise things. We look at, head shrinks, psychologists and psychiatrists. We look at, and we get an understanding. Yes, there's. I'm not saying that that's not wrong. It gives us an understanding of what's happening. But when you understand the demonic impact on people's lives, you can see that demons mess with you. Basically, they mess with your head, they mess with your body, they mess with your spirit. And when you're set free in body, spirit, mind, you're a healed, transformed person. And there's no doubting about it. That was a mind-blowing thing for me, because I've never experienced that. Never experienced that in my life, other than my own personal testimony of David's ministry to me about 5 years ago. But the other wonderful thing for me while I was over in Zambia, and was the joy of actually baptising people. And other than my involvement with our youth group 15 years or so ago at church in Gore, and having the privilege of seeing some youngsters baptised then, I had not involved myself in that sort of ministry, or in any way. But I had two opportunities to, more than two actually. We actually had several opportunities actually. We baptised Zambian style. Yeah. When you baptise people, you have to be resourceful sometimes, and so buckets come in very handy. And so we had the opportunity of baptising some youngsters in the care of a lovely lady called Kathy. She was a widowed woman who had taken 9 children off the street, and she was caring for them. And honestly, I don't know how she made ends meet. Life is really difficult for many Zambian people. Like, I mean, we think we have, trouble making ends meet. They literally live on in our currency. They literally live on dollars and cents. No kidding. If they can earn 10 kwacha, which is about $1.60 in New Zealand terms, if they can earn 10 kwacha in a day, they're doing really well in some cases. So it's a crazy economy. Well, how Kathy she had a little market stall in a market, and she was competing with, you go to markets in Zambia and you have, that person sells tomatoes, that person sells tomatoes, that person sells tomatoes, that person sells tomatoes, and they're cheap to jowl, and you just wonder how the heck they make ends meet. How do they get a sale? You go to City Market and there's shoes, like, from here to the wall down and that way, there's shoes, second-hand shoes, piles of them, and people are trying to sell them. Anyway, Kathy's, supporting these youngsters. There's no welfare system in Zambia. You don't have social welfare. They're entirely dependent on their own resources and family support. And we had the pleasure of baptising 6 of their children, didn't we? There was 6 of them, at least 6, yeah. 6 or 8 children, yeah. And we each got to do a couple each. It was wonderful, here you are, you're going to this little house, she literally lives in a home that would be no deeper than probably that deep, and down to the end of the table there. Probably less than that, actually, less than that. She lives in a home with 9 children, about 2 rooms, and that's her home. It's a rented home, and she wanted us to come and witness to her youngsters and share the gospel with them. And so Ricky preached the gospel, and all these youngsters wanted to give their lives to the Lord. They wanted to be baptised. So we trundled them outside and had a baptismal service outside. It was so cool, and they were carrying water from the well for us. That was just wonderful. And then another young fellow, he was a friend of Albert's. Albert's, Ricky's brother-in-law, one of Rena's 2 younger brothers, Albert and Lulu, is the youngest. Anyway, Albert's friend is a neighbour next door. His name's Nicholas. And I had the pleasure of baptising Nicholas. I don't know how he was ministered to. Do you guys more probably...
David was.
Nicholas's conversion, but anyway, Nicholas, we prayed for him. He had some sort of... Look, the best way I can describe it is he just had this big swelling on the side of his face, and it had it ever since a child. It wasn't a goiter. It was something to do with, I don't know, it was fluid or something. Something wasn't properly draining. I'm not a doctor, and I don't pretend to be. But anyway, this was on the side of his face. But he was just the most amazing guy, a really hard worker. Like, these guys get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, just on the break of dawn, and they're out watering their gardens, and they're doing bits and pieces. They're no slugs. Those who want to work really hard. And Nicholas was one of them, and he made bricks, among other things, gardening and what have you, to support his family, wife and family. And I had the privilege of baptising him, and we actually found a pool, didn't we?
Yeah.
you wander around these little routes, and you find your way down, and here's this little pool, and it was a nice cold little pool. It wasn't surprisingly it wasn't warm. It was actually, believe it or not, it's winter in Zambia too, but their winters is